Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for High Velocity Radio.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of High Velocity Radio, and this is going to be a good one. Today I have with me Dale Richards with Excel Management Systems. Welcome, Dale.
Welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be on your show and work together.
Well, before we get too far into things, tell us about Excel Management Systems. How are you serving folks?
Well, I appreciate that opportunity. Excel has been around for 30 plus years, and we have helped over 150 companies to double, triple their revenue, profits, and value. And that's kind of the crux of what we do.
Now, how'd you get into the valuation game?
Well, about 22 years ago, I decided that was a nice add-on to optimizing companies. And so I went to a course at 100 hours of practical application as well as 100 hours of classroom and became a certified valuator. And then we have to have so many CPE credits every year to recertify every 3 years. So it's a arduous task, but I enjoyed it, and it turned out really well for me.
Now, why is that important in your mind to have a business owners to kind of get a certified valuation of their company to see kind of where they're at and how they're doing?
Well, thank you, Lee, for that question, because there's a number of people out there who are quote unquote valuing a business, and they might use a discounted cash flow of an owner's 5-year net benefit stream or net income or EBITDA, and then they throw into the wind and pick a certain discount rate, and that's the value that people tend to go to. And that's not even close to what we look at. We have 3 different methods, and I like to see 6 to 12 calculations, so that I believe knowledge is power. And the more information you have around what is bringing value into your company, how many different areas of value there are, what might lead to a higher value. We look up under, there's 3 methods. So let's talk about them for a second, Lee, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
There's an asset method, which looks at your balance sheet. And the problem with balance sheets is they're GAAP accounting, and they don't relate at all to the value of the company. Let's talk about that just for a second. So do you know what inventory is brought into on a balance sheet? Is it cost or market if somebody has inventory?
You're asking the wrong guy. Math isn't my first language, so
okay, that's fine.
Math related is not going to work for me.
Okay, I'll help you out then. Normally, this is a very interactive kind of question-answer thing, but probably 99% of all companies, when they bring in inventory, it's at cost, and then they add it up, right? They'll 2 times that cost, 2.5, 4, 3, whatever. So the market value of that inventory is not even close to what's listed on the balance sheet. Another thing is depreciation. You've heard of depreciation, Lee, on
Absolutely.
assets?
Yeah.
So depreciation is the way the government has designed us to be able to orderly depreciate off an asset. So let's say you buy an asset for $1 million that's depreciated over 10 years. You're going to write off $100,000 a year, but your payment schedule, you could have paid cash or you could have paid a different bank loan. And there's a new program. It's not really new, but Section 179 of depreciation allows you to write off $1 million in 1 year. So let's say you're paying it over 10 years, but you write it all off on your balance sheet. That asset's going to say 1 million asset minus 1 million Section 179 depreciation. So it's going to be listed on the balance sheet as 0. So your assets are orderly depreciated, but they have no idea of what the market value of those assets are. So we know that assets aren't correct on the balance sheet. And then we have receivables. Most businesses have receivables. And if they're on a net 30 days and they have 20% of their receivables that are older than 90 days or 120 days, no bank would even consider them as collateral. Therefore, they have to be taken off the balance sheet. But most people don't do that very often. In fact, not even every year. So you've got a bunch of receivables on there that you may never collect. So those three items alone tell us that the balance sheet is not the market value of your company. Now, a lot of people buy and sell on the balance sheet, and typically the balance sheet is the lowest number of the three different methodologies. So it's really not the best thing. If you can buy a business for just their balance sheet assets minus liabilities, more power to you. You probably got a great deal. But if you're selling, I wouldn't sell it that way.
How do you handle valuation of a service business that doesn't have stuff?
Okay, so that's a great question. It leads us to the other two methodologies. One is a market method. Have you sold a home, Lee, in your career or your life?
I've bought a home, but not sold one.
Okay, so how did you determine, or how did the seller determine the value of their home?
By the comparables in the neighborhood.
Comps. So they looked at 3 to 5 comps in the neighborhood, right? So there's a methodology called the market method in valuing a business. We have access to 60,000 private transactions. We look up under the standard industry code, which is the SIC code, and we see what's been happening in that business's industry in the market. What's been selling? What are the price? We get a high, a low, an average, a standard deviation, a number of transactions, and that tells us what the market value might be. And have you heard of an EBITDA multiplier, Lee?
No. Tell me what that is.
Most businesses are bought and sold by an EBITDA multiplier, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Now, there's some confusion a little bit about why you would add back into your cash flow interest and taxes and depreciation, because they're all subtracted on your profit and loss statement. But a new owner, let's say you have a company and it's an S Corp, and a new owner might have a C Corp. They have different tax structures. Let's say you have $1 million loan, and the person that's buying it is not going, you're going to keep that loan, and the person buying it doesn't have a loan. So their cap structure is going to be different. So the interest will be their interest, and same with depreciation. So the reason businesses are bought and sold by an EBITDA multiplier is to normalize the cash flow, so that then a buyer can put it in their particular mode of interest, taxes, depreciation. So anyway, most businesses are bought and sold by an EBITDA multiplier, but we also want to look at a revenue multiplier, because it tells us about what the company is operating. Let's say your business is your revenue multiplier is $10 million, but your EBITDA multiplier is $8 million. So what does that tell you about a business? You want to guess, Lee?
$10 million is better.
I like that answer. That's awesome. 10 million is better. But what it tells me is that their business is not operating as efficiently and as effectively as what their revenue would generate. So, or I've seen just the opposite. In fact, I've got a client right now in Arizona, and their revenue multiplier is 30 million and their EBITDA multiplier is 50 million. What that tells me is they have a system and they have a better operating methodology than their revenue would be worth. So it tells us a lot. And we also get the high and low. So we get bands. We get about 6 numbers out of the market comparables. And so that's a very powerful tool, is to see what's been going on in your industry over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Then there's a methodology called the income method, which is your cash flow. And so that one's very important, because new buyers want to see, what are they going to get? What is going to be the cash flow out of the company? And that's where I was talking about the discount rate. We present value those 5 years back to create a value, but in certified valuation, we also have what's called the terminal value, and we simulate selling your business in year 5 and then present value that lump sum back. So when a business owner takes their cash flow over the last 5 years to a CPA or some other non-certified valuator, they'll do just the 5 years and they forget the terminal value. And then the discount rate, typically they just go online and find number, and we have a build-up method. It has 6 different elements to determine what is the risk of that company, and that turns out to be the discount rate. So those are some of the nuances. And by the way, we on the income method, we want to get history, 5 years projection from the owners. We do a statistical study to determine from the history where is the business going, and we'll do a valuation from that. And if you're looking at an acquisition from a synergistic company or a company in the industry, there's usually a lot of expenses that will be reduced, such as the overhead, your back office, maybe some marketing, some inventory. So we would like to do a cash flow analysis with those synergistic expenses taken out, and that's going to increase the value, because this is knowledge is power for an owner. And now we're looking at 10 or 11 or 12 numbers, and we can see where all the value is coming in and where it may be short. So that's what at least the methodology that Excel Management's been using for 20 plus years. And I find that that's very unique in the industry. After speaking 350 times in 38 states over the last 8 years on this subject, almost nobody does what I just explained. So now, that was a lot of talking.
Well, Dale, I have a question about it. If I'm selling my company, and my company is a service company,
yes,
and is it just strictly math? Is it just strictly the numbers are the numbers, or is there any kind of subjectivity in terms of the multiplier, or in terms of kind of the value based on the brand value in the marketplace? Because like if I'm a soda company and I'm Coca-Cola and I sell soda, or I'm Bob's Soda Company and I sell soda, we both sell the same thing, but Coca-Cola, I would imagine, has a higher value just because it's Coca-Cola, or any franchise or something like that. Their brand has value that maybe is difficult to put a number on.
Yeah, so Lee, that's a great question. And yes, those are what I call soft issues. So let's talk about some of the soft issues. And a lot of people call the goodwill. Now, there's 2 types of goodwill. And so I'm just going to, before I answer your question, I'm going to explain the difference between goodwill, which is the brand, your customer base, your reputation. That's one type of goodwill. And then there's an accounting goodwill. If you actually see goodwill on a balance sheet of a company, they had a transaction in which the transaction value was higher or lower than what the balance sheet actually indicated. So there's an accounting adjustment called goodwill, which that difference is allocated among customer base, intellectual property, brand, etc. So if there's goodwill on a balance sheet, they've had a transaction. Now let's talk about the soft issues. One of the greatest soft issues is what I try to share with executives, is to turn tribal knowledge to systems. You have any idea, Lee, what tribal knowledge is?
It's the stuff in the brain of the owners or the C-suite?
Good answer. So it's undocumented brain power. It's the thought process that people do. Let's talk about like a sales team. What are their scripts they use? What are the materials they give to a client on the first meeting? How do they get the second meeting? All of that is in someone's head. And if that is documented with what's called KPIs, key performance indicators, or metrics, now you have turned tribal knowledge to systems, and the company has lower risk. They're more efficient, more effective, they're reproducible, they're scalable. And that is a soft multiplier of 1 to 3 EBITDA. So let's say I determine that your company is worth 10 EBITDA multiplier, and you have systemized every one of your departments. That could be as high as 13. So that's a really powerful soft issue. Let's talk about another soft issue, and that is the loyalty of your customers. So if you're familiar with Microsoft, 10 years ago, how did you buy Microsoft Office? It was $250 and you bought the Office suite. Now you pay a monthly SaaS model. That's software every month. And just by doing that, the reoccurring revenue is worth 1 to 4 EBITDA X over a one-time sales. So you may not have a recurring model, but you may have customers that keep coming back year after year after year. And so a recurring revenue stream is way more powerful. It's a it's a soft issue that again adds to the numbers that are calculated. Also, brand. If you have market share, let's say you have over 50% of the market share in your community, that also lends to a soft issue of multiplier. So you're correct, Lee. There's a bunch of other soft issues that are part of the knowledge is power in any kind of negotiation that you can bring up that will be above whatever the numbers say. Well, obviously it could be below too. Let's say you had a 10 EBITDA multiplier and you have no systems and it's all tribal knowledge. That's actually going to reduce 1 to 3 EBITDA X because of the risk of having your executives have all that information up in their head. So did that help answer your question on that one, Lee?
Yeah, that was great. Now, I have a question about how clients work with you. Is this something that they're just hiring you right before they're selling or in the years before a sale? Or is it something that I would imagine has value just throughout the life cycle of the company to make sure they're hitting their benchmarks and just squeezing out as much value as they can as they grow?
Lee, you have great questions. I appreciate this question as well. I highly recommend that a company should do a certified valuation every 2 to 4 years, because it will show what is increasing value and what are the trends are. And then it also might show the deficiencies in certain areas in which then they can buoy up and strengthen and augment. So I highly recommend it every 2 to 4 years. And COVID, let's talk about COVID for a minute. There's been a big thought process that I'm going to wait until the impact of 2020 I fully understand. Maybe I grew, maybe I shrunk, whatever the case may be. And I think it's really powerful. And I've been recommending this on my weekly blog for the last 4 months, is to do a certified valuation for the years 2015 through 2019, which gives you a baseline. Then from the baseline, it's a lot easier to do an adjusted value from 2017 through 2020. Or 2016 through 2020. We take 5 years. So 2015 through 2019 is 5, and 2016 through 2020. And so 16, 17, 18, 19. It'd be 15 through 20 and 14 through 19. Anyway, we do 5 years. So the bottom line is I highly recommend that a company do a pre-COVID value as a baseline. And then it's a lot easier to adjust, because if you went down in 2020, it's called an anomaly. And we can do an add back based on what you may do into 2021. And it becomes, instead of a big spike down in value, it becomes an anomaly, and we throw out that piece of data. So that's what I'm recommending to companies, is they go back and do a 5-year valuation up through 2019.
Now, is the opposite true, that if you have a good year this year, then that might be kind of a bonus in terms of your valuation because you were able to withstand this crisis in a positive manner?
So that potentially could be a nice blip, but it also then depends on why did the blip occur. If it was strictly because you're handling masks and sanitizer and things like that, well, how long are we going to be wearing masks? Who can project, right? Maybe 2020, 2021 will turn out to be a spike, and then you'll go back to normal. So I just believe that a baseline is important, and then we have to ask a bunch of questions about what happened in 20 and why. And it could be a nice bump that may continue, or it could be an anomaly that either went up or down for just 1 year. But with the baseline, you know what your value was before the impact of 20.
Now, in your business, what is that potential client, what's the pain they're having right now where they're thinking, you know what, I got to call that Excel guy. He's the guy that can fix this. What's kind of happening in these companies, right before they need to call you?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of companies that are family owned have come up through the ranks, and they've got children that are now helping run the business and so forth. And their tendency to be really tribal knowledge bound. And we have tools that analyze both operations. We have 66 questions that analyze the operations of a company. And we have 5 years of data of financials that we operate on 4 different areas: their asset management, their growth management, their effectiveness, and their cash flow. And so those tools can be used to augment their strategy to bring higher value. We also like to interview 5 to 7 employees to get the culture and the ideas behind what the employees think. So that's put together into a top 10 action list that can double, triple your revenue, profits, and value before you go into any kind of transaction. So these are some things. I really appreciate the question on that, Lee, because that's what is a tool. These are tools can help an owner if they're looking at wanting to sell in 3, 5, 7 years to double, triple their value, which is very valuable, rather than waiting until the private equity firm comes and talks to them and says, oh, we're interested in your company, and they throw out an offer of an 8 EBITDA when you could have got 12. And
it sounds like you got some of your tribal knowledge systematized, Dale.
Totally. So that I eat my own medicine, I think, is what you're telling me, and that's certainly a true statement. So, and just to give you an idea, there is $2.2 trillion of private equity available right now. So there's way more money than deals, and private equity companies typically look for companies that have $500,000 to about $5 million in EBITDA, revenue $5 million to about $50 million. That's their sweet spot. So if you know of companies that are in that arena, they're probably getting a phone call every month or every week by a private equity firm trying to get them to sell. So there's a lot of money. There's not enough good companies. So that's another reason to prepare if you have any interest at all in capitalize. And there's a number of exits, right, for a company. They can sell to their employees with an ESOP program. They can sell to a strategic buyer, somebody in the industry. They can sell to a financial buyer like a venture capitalist or a private equity firm. Now, let's talk about those for just a minute. If you're looking at the synergistic buyer, then remember that value I mentioned that you add back in those synergistic expenses. They're usually more patient. You typically can get a higher value, and you find that your culture and so forth is somewhat preserved on that type of merger. If you go to a private equity firm or a financial buyer, they're going to want 3 to 5x in 3 to 5 years. So if they buy you for 10 million, they're looking to get 30 to 50 million in 3 to 5 years of their particular share. So they are going to hold your feet to the fire vigorously to achieve the financial objectives. Now, why is that good for an owner? It's great because typically they only buy 60 to 90% of the company. And so then the owner is kept to run the company, and they may get in their second exit a higher number than their first exit. But keep in mind, if you don't achieve the financial objectives, then they'll bring in another CEO or another executive team. So that's kind of a little bit of insight about buyers. We could talk a little bit about public markets to get on the New York.
Why don't we just leave it at this for this session, because I think that we can go on forever. It sounds like you have a wealth of knowledge in this area, and that this could be a 5-hour interview if we had the time. Now, but you do a lot of work, I would imagine, with family-run businesses.
Yes. So
they have unique challenges as well, right?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick story. There was a company that was doing 50 million in revenue and losing about $500,000 a year, and they were in their 3rd and 4th generation. There were 2 problems. They had old assets, and the 3rd and 4th generation were owed a living instead of earning a living. So 2 things happened. This was a oil and gas company. We went to Chevron, which is a big brand out here in the West, and they modernized their stations to C-stores, 13 of them over 3 years, paid half the capital. And then we put in what's called the productivity pyramid, which is goals, coaching, accountability, and rewards to make the third and fourth generation accountable and actually do something in the company. Well, in 2 years, that $500,000 loss went to $2 million in profits. The $50 million in revenue went to $75 million. So the problem with family companies is, are they actively engaged? Have they been trained? Do they understand financials? Do they understand? They typically usually understand the operation of the company, but because maybe they started as a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old. But do they understand financials and operations? And are they a good manager? Are they a good coach? So those are some things that in a family-owned business you want to look at and try to work on, which will increase your stability and your value.
Well, Dale, if there's a family business out there that wants to learn more about your offerings and your firm, or a business out there that's thinking about exiting at some point, I think it's a good idea to have a conversation with you or somebody on your team. What's the website or a way to get a hold of you?
Lee, you're awesome. Thank you. It's www.successbiznow. So that's successbiznow.com. So Success Biz Now. There's over 100 videos on there of satisfied customers, and there's competitive analysis. There's lots of positive things that a person can look at. So that's successbiznow.com. Thank you for asking.
Well, Dale, thank you so much for sharing your story. You're doing important work, and we appreciate you.
Well, it's been a real privilege to have you and Stone contact us, and we look forward to working with you and your team in the future. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and you guys are doing a great work. Keep up the good work.
All right, this is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on High Velocity Radio.